You're forcing yourself to be positive. And it's exhausting you more than the problem ever did. You wake up and tell yourself, today will be different. You say the right things. You think the right thoughts, or at least you try to. But underneath all of that, something just doesn't move. You know the drill. Stay positive. Keep going. Focus on the good. And still, there's this weight that follows you around. Not loud enough to stop you, just heavy enough to slow everything down. You've probably gotten good at this. The smile at the right moment. The reframe when things feel off. The internal voice that says, don't go there. From the outside, it probably looks like resilience. But you know what it actually feels like. It feels like effort. Constant, draining, invisible effort. You're not broken. You're not doing it wrong. But you are doing something that doesn't actually work. And your mind probably already knows that. That tension, knowing something isn't working, but not being able to stop doing it. Buddhism has understood that for a very long time, and what it has to say about. That might be the most honest thing you've heard in a while. That's what we're going to look at today. And you felt this, that moment when you put on a smile over something real, and instead of feeling better, you feel more alone, more distant from yourself, like you've just told yourself a lie, and now you have to maintain it. Here's the thing about forced positivity. It doesn't start as dishonesty. It starts as protection. At some point, something felt too heavy, and the easiest thing your mind could do to survive was to look away, to say, it's fine, or I'll focus on the good, or other people have it worse. And in that moment, that worked. It got you through the day. But then it became a habit, and then it became a rule. And now anytime something uncomfortable rises up inside you, the response is automatic. Push it down, reframe it. Tell yourself something better, and you can feel it. The effort that takes, not just today, every day. The weight of all those unfinished feelings that never got to complete their arc. Buddha said, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. People often read that as a reason to think only positive things, but that's not what it means. The mind is everything, which means if you're using your mind to suppress what's real, that suppression becomes everything too. You don't escape the thought by rejecting it. You just make it louder in a different room. This is the part that's hard to see from the inside. When you're practicing forced positivity, it feels like discipline. It feels like you're winning. You're not dwelling. You're not spiraling. You're choosing to focus on what's good. That feels like the right thing to do. That feels responsible. But Buddhism describes something called sankhara, the mental formations we build up over time through repetition. Every time you force a positive thought over a difficult one, you're not deleting the difficult one. You're building a habit of avoidance. You're training the mind to reflexively move away from anything that feels uncomfortable. And over time, that habit becomes its own kind of noise. A constant low hum of things you've refused to sit with, things that are still there, still waiting. And that's where it gets harder, because the exhaustion you feel isn't from the original problem. It's from the managing. It's from the constant internal monitoring, checking your thoughts, correcting them, reshaping them, making sure nothing too dark gets through. That's not peace. That's control. And control is the opposite of peace. Think about how much energy that takes across a single day. You wake up and check your emotional weather before you even get out of bed. You move through your morning with one part of your mind. watching the other part to make sure nothing uncomfortable surfaces. You interact with people while simultaneously managing your emotional temperature. You lie down at night and the thoughts are still moving because they never got to land anywhere. That's not a character flaw. That's exhaustion operating as a system. Consider what it actually feels like in the body when you suppress something and try to smile through it. There's a tightness, right? Somewhere in the chest or the jaw or the back of the throat. Something that says, this isn't finished. Because it isn't. Your body knows. Even when your mind is learned to redirect, the body keeps a different record. The tension that lives in your shoulders. The breath that never quite goes all the way down. The way you feel slightly braced, even in safe moments. These are not random. These are the physical signature of emotional suppression. The body holding what the mind was told to let go of. Buddhism doesn't ask you to be positive. It asks you to be present. And those are not the same thing. Being positive means deciding in advance how you should feel. Being present means noticing what you actually feel without deciding what to do with it yet. The difference sounds small. It isn't. One of the core teachings of the Buddha is the concept of dukkha, which is often translated as suffering, but is more accurately described as a deep, pervasive sense of unease. The restlessness beneath the surface. That persistent sense that something is off, even when you can't name it. Buddha didn't say dukkha is a problem to fix. He said it's a reality to understand. And here's what that means for you. When you feel that low-level dissatisfaction, even on a quote-unquote good day, you don't need to redirect your thoughts. You need to get curious about what's underneath that feeling. What is this actually about? Not what should I think instead. What is this actually about? Most people have never actually asked that question. Not really. They've asked a different question disguised as that one. They've asked, how do I make this stop? Which is not curiosity. That's still control. Real curiosity sits with the discomfort long enough to learn something from it. Not to wallow, not to replay, just to stay with it and be still enough to actually hear what's underneath. Because your difficult feelings are not malfunctions. They're information. They're your mind's way of telling you something real about what you actually value, what you're actually afraid of, what you actually need. When you shut them down before they can finish speaking, you lose the message. And then you wonder why the feeling keeps coming back. You're beginning to see this differently. Think about it this way. A river doesn't stop flowing because you put a rock in it. It moves around the rock. It finds another path. The water doesn't disappear. It just goes somewhere you're not watching. Your avoided emotions are exactly like that. You don't get rid of them by covering them with positivity. They find another path. They show up as irritability with people you love when nothing specific even happened. They show up as disconnection, that feeling of being slightly outside your own life, watching it through glass. They show up as a vague sadness you can't trace back to any source, as the feeling that even good moments don't fully land. And you know this feeling. You've been here before. That moment when something beautiful is happening, a good conversation, a quiet evening, a moment of sun, and instead of feeling it fully, you're watching yourself try to feel it, slightly removed, like there's distance between you and your own experience. That distance isn't apathy. That's the result of years of managed emotion. When you practice keeping things at arm's length, eventually everything ends up there, including the good things, including the moments you were actually trying to protect. The irony of forced positivity is that it can eventually hollow out the very experiences it was trying to preserve. And that's the thing that nobody warned you about. Think about a time when something genuinely good happened, a moment you had been waiting for, and instead of feeling full relief or joy, you felt something quieter, something more like, okay, good, and then moved on. That's not ingratitude. That's what happens when the emotional range gets compressed. When you spend enough time suppressing the lows, the highs start to flatten too. Because the same capacity that lets you feel deep pain is the same capacity that lets you feel deep joy. You can't selectively numb one without affecting the other. Buddhism teaches something called equanimity, upekkha, but it's often misunderstood. People think equanimity means not being affected, staying neutral, not letting things move you, but that's not what it means. True equanimity isn't the absence of feeling. It's the stability to feel fully without being destabilized by it, to be moved without being swept away, to let joy be joy and sadness be sadness, without needing either one to be something different. That kind of stability comes from practice, from learning to sit with discomfort in small amounts over time until the discomfort stops feeling like a threat, until the mind learns that it can hold difficult things and still be okay. But you can't get there by avoiding the difficult things. You get there by slowly, gradually learning to meet them. And that takes something most self-help advice never asked for, which is patience with your own process. The Buddhist concept of upadana talks about clinging, the way we grasp at certain states and push away others. Most people think clinging means holding on to good things, but it also means clinging to a certain idea of how you should be, who you should be, what kind of person you are. Forced positivity is often rooted in that kind of clinging. The belief that a good person, a strong person, a spiritual person should be able to rise above the difficult feeling and not be affected by it. And so when the difficult feeling comes, it doesn't just feel like sadness or anger or grief. It also feels like failure, like you've let yourself down, like you're not as far along as you should be. That second layer, the judgment you add on top of the feeling, that's where most of the suffering actually lives. Not in the original feeling, in the rejection of it. And this is why so many people who describe themselves as spiritual or as people who work on themselves often carry a particular kind of quiet exhaustion because they've added a whole new category of things they're not supposed to feel. They've learned the language of peace and then used it as another way to evaluate themselves, to measure how far they've come, to decide whether they're doing it right. That's not the point of any of this. That was never the point. The point, as the Buddha taught it, is freedom. Not freedom from difficult feelings, freedom from the war against them. The Buddha taught that the path to liberation isn't through the avoidance of difficult experience. It's through clear seeing. In Pali, the word is vipassana, insight, direct observation of what is actually happening in the mind. Not what should be happening, not what you'd prefer to be happening, what is actually happening. This isn't a method of intensifying pain. It's a method of moving through it. Because when you see something clearly, without resistance, it begins to naturally shift. Not because you forced it, because you stopped fighting it. And honesty in Buddhism is an act of compassion toward yourself. Not brutal self-analysis, not dwell, just the quiet willingness to say, this is here, and that's okay. Let me look at it. But here's what nobody tells you about this. Clear seeing is not the same as wallowing. Some people here don't suppress your emotions and think that means stay inside the feeling forever. Replay the story. Keep the wound open. That's not what this is. Buddhism draws a very important distinction between experiencing an emotion and being consumed by it. You can feel grief without becoming grief. You can feel frustration without declaring yourself a frustrated person. You can acknowledge the difficult thing without making it the only thing. There's a phrase in mindfulness teaching, name it to tame it. The simple act of labeling what you feel without judgment actually reduces the intensity of the emotional charge. Research has confirmed this, but Buddhism understood it long before the research. When you name what's present, you create a small space between you and the feeling. You're not the emotion. You're the awareness that's noticing it. And that difference is everything. The practice itself is simpler than you might expect, but it requires something you're not used to giving yourself, which is permission. Permission to feel what's actually there, without immediately trying to manage it into something more acceptable. When something uncomfortable arises, instead of reaching for a more positive thought, just pause. Name what you're actually feeling, not as a judgment, just as an observation. There is anger here. There is sadness here. There is fear here. And then breathe into it, not to fix it, just to let it know you've seen it. That's it. That's the whole practice. It sounds too simple. And that's exactly why most people don't trust it. They want a technique, a system, a set of steps that guarantee a result. But the Buddha wasn't offering a productivity hack. He was offering something stranger and more radical than that. He was saying the awareness itself is the transformation. The seeing is the thing, not what you do after the seeing. Not the insight you extract from it. Just the act of clear, compassionate attention. When you turn towards something difficult with real attention, something in it shifts. Not because you fixed it, because it finally got to be real. Because it stopped being the thing you were fighting and became just the thing that was there. Most emotions aren't asking to be solved. They're asking to be witnessed. And you are the only person who can do that for yourself. This is what practitioners do in deep meditation. They don't sit in bliss. They sit in whatever is there, and they watch it move, because everything moves. Every emotion, every thought, every difficult state, it arises. It peaks, it passes. Not because you forced it out. Because you stopped fighting it long enough for it to complete its natural arc. Buddhism calls this anicca, impermanence. Everything changes. Everything passes. Even this. But when you force positivity over something, you interrupt that arc. You freeze the emotion midway through its natural cycle, push it underground, and it waits. It doesn't dissolve. It waits, and the longer it waits, the more pressure builds, which is why things that should be manageable sometimes feel overwhelming. Why a small comment from someone hits harder than it should. Why an ordinary Wednesday can suddenly feel like too much. It's not that you're weak. It's that you've been holding a great deal for a very long time, without letting any of it complete its natural process. You keep paying for it in the small costs. The low-grade tiredness that doesn't go away with rest. The moments of sudden overwhelm that seem disproportionate to what triggered them. The distance you feel from people you love, even when nothing is technically wrong. The way you can be in the middle of a good thing and still feel like you're somewhere just outside your own life. These are not signs that you're broken. They're signs that you've been carrying something that was never meant to be carried. It was meant to be felt and then released. There's a teaching attributed to the Buddha. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. For a long time, people read that as, stay positive. Suffering is a choice. But that's not what it means. Pain is the raw experience, the loss, the disappointment, the difficulty. Suffering is what happens when you resist the pain, when you spend energy trying to undo what has already happened, trying to make yourself feel something other than what you actually feel. The suffering isn't in the original pain. It's in the fighting. And here's the thing that matters. Mindfulness isn't about achieving a calm mind. It's about meeting the mind you actually have on any given day with enough steadiness to not be swept away by it. That's a very different goal, and it's a much more achievable one. You don't need to feel good all the time. You just need to feel what's actually there without adding the weight of needing it to be something else. That shift, small as it sounds, is where real peace begins. Not the peace of having nothing difficult in your life. The peace of not being at war with what's in it. Each time you choose to notice rather than manage, you're practicing something the Buddha called samma sankappa, right intention. The intention not to force, not to suppress, not to perform a version of yourself that feels easier for everyone, including you. The intention to meet each moment honestly and trust that the honesty itself is enough. Not every feeling needs to be understood. Not every difficult moment needs to yield a lesson. Some of them just need to pass, and they will. Impermanence means the difficult things pass too, but they pass more cleanly when you let them be real. Think about how different your days might feel if even one part of the internal monitoring switched off. If, for one moment, you stopped evaluating your emotional state and just let it be whatever it was. Not good, not bad, just present. That's not giving up. That's the most sophisticated form of self-care there is. It requires more courage than positivity ever does, because positivity keeps you comfortable. Presence asks you to be honest, and honesty, when you've been managing things for a long time, can feel uncomfortable at first. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing something real for the first time in a while. And that's the thing about all of this. You were never taught to feel things clearly. You were taught to manage them, to reframe them, to get through them as quickly as possible. And you learned well. You're very good at managing, but managing is not the same as healing. And the fact that you're tired, actually genuinely tired, not just physically, is the most honest signal your mind has sent you in a long time. It's not telling you to stop caring. It's not telling you to become pessimistic. It's telling you that the armor you built has gotten heavy, and it's okay to set some of it down. Not all at once, just today, with one thing, one feeling you've been reframing. Instead of reframing it, just notice it. Give it one breath. Don't try to solve it. Just let it be seen. You don't have to announce this to anyone. You don't have to build a whole new practice around it. Just once today, when something difficult surfaces, don't immediately redirect. Stay with it for 10 seconds longer than you normally would, just to see what it actually is. Curiosity instead of control. Honesty instead of performance. That's the shift. That's the beginning of what Buddhism calls metta, loving kindness, but beginning with yourself. Not forcing yourself to feel loving, just deciding that what you feel is worth looking at. that you are worth the honesty. Over time, you'll find that this small practice changes something. Not everything at once, but slowly the armor gets lighter. The good moments land more fully. The difficult ones move through more cleanly because you've stopped fighting the river and started learning how to move with it. That's not giving up control. That's wisdom. Real, quiet wisdom. The kind that takes time to trust. But once you do, you wonder how you went so long without it. If this way of seeing the mind resonates with you, there's more here every week. New videos grounded in Buddhist wisdom, written for real life, right in the middle of it. Subscribe if you want more of this, and take care of yourself today. Not by forcing anything, just by noticing a little more.